Serious, Redditors who have had a near-death experience. What happened? Mom had a seizure while driving and I was in the passenger seat. Couldn't reach the brakes, so tried to take the wheel and do the best I could. Drove into a guardrail just before a pretty steep cliff and went under it, but it stopped us before we went over. That'll do. That'll do. I was shot with a bow and arrow. The arrow hit me in the chest and luckily missed my vital organs. It was a complete accident and I made a full recovery, but even though I forgave him, my friend who fired the shot and I no longer speak. Let me get some details on this one, please. A friend and I were jumped by 4 grown men and accused of selling drugs. Totally untrue. Unfortunately, this was on the top floor of a 5-story building. My friend was punched but escaped. I was cornered. 4 grown men kicked me all over the body and head before eventually telling me to get on my feet as I was to be thrown over the balcony. No way was I getting up, but literally just as I was dragged to my feet the police showed up. I was told to follow the 4 men down the stairs and away, but then they changed their mind and told me to go in front of them. As soon as I was in front, I ran as fast as I could to the police who had gone into the shop on the ground floor, presumably to find whoever had called them, most likely alerted by my screams. It fricked me up for a long time, and even now 22 years later I am still uncomfortable in situations with groups of people who I don't know and who are drinking. As a teenager I was skateboarding down the stairs near a road. I had been doing a few different tricks, but on my last try I did my signature nightmare flip, which I've landed 100 times. Somehow this time I fricked up and fell on my ass. My board went into the street and got annihilated by a box truck instantly. Had I landed it, I would have been killed. It wasn't the kind of thing where I saw my life flash before my eyes or anything, but I just sat there in shock as the guy stopped and started screaming at me. My friend started yelling back, blah blah blah. Everything was like muted and I just stared into the street like, what the frick just happened? I was using a urinal in a restaurant, and the next moment I was on a backboard surrounded by first responders. I had fainted in the restroom and smashed my head on the tile floor, causing a brain bleed. 1/3 of the people who do this die on impact. Sonny Bono. Another 1/3 die within 24 hours. Natasha Richardson. I was in the fortunate 1/3 that survive, but still have some lifelong issues from it. Driving home from school for Thanksgiving break just over a week ago, I was caught in a flash flood going 80 down the highway. I was in the right lane of a 4-lane, 2 each way, road. A gust of wind hit me and I flew off the left side into a ditch and spun around like a carnival ride. If the ditch wasn't quite as deep I would have ended up in oncoming traffic. Closest to dying I've ever come. I overdosed when I was about 16. It just felt like sleep. Though one thing I'd recommend, don't do that, cause paramedics will cause you as much pain as they can to keep you awake. It was August, and I think 2010, could be 2009, was during an under 18 sailing week. I was 17 or 16. Seriously, my memory sucks. Was during the 3rd race that week. Sailing along solo in my boat, I was kind of in the middle of the pack, but I'd gone a different tack to everyone else and so was quite far away from them all, out in the middle of the estuary. Then I capsized. Usually this is no big deal, happens relatively frequently. Only problem was this time the boom swung around and hit me on the head on the way down, throwing me into the water and leaving me stuck in the ropes. I was underwater, feeling groggy from the blow to my head, but remembered the training and calmly tried to untangle myself, which I managed. At this point I tried to surface, as I was now free and running out of air. The way the boat had gone down had ended up with me underneath the sail, which itself was now covered with ridiculously heavy water. I started panicking and trying to force the sail up with me under it, unable to breathe. I realized I'd never get up, so I tried to calm down again and started struggling to swim along under it. Swimming underwater, wearing a life jacket sucks by the way. I realized the current was pushing the boat along with me and trapping me under the sail. So I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to force myself further underwater, swimming down and pushing my feet on the sail. You see, the current is actually weaker further down than it is on the surface. So my hope was to let the boat drift over me as drifted in the weaker current. I held there for a few more seconds, still not having breathed in I don't know how long, before clawing my way back up. If I didn't hit air, I knew I'd die. Thank God the current higher up had pushed the boat over my head, leaving me relatively close by. I grabbed onto the boat, now fully upside down, and kinda pulled myself onto it. After a few minutes spluttering up water and gasping, I righted the boat and just lay inside. Sails and ropes flapping everywhere. Just glad to be alive. Holy crap. This was an anxious read. You made all the right moves, my friend. Me and some friends used to go to the beach to play volleyball some evenings. One night, me and one of the guys walked over to a gas station across the road in between games to get a snack or whatever. A minute or two later everyone pulled up in a car. When we went to go back, the chick driving, who no one really knew that well, was like, hey, just hop on the trunk and hold on. It's just right back across the road. So me and my friend are like, okay cool, and hop on. Well, this girl had the brilliant idea once we were in the parking lot to take a turn going about 40 miles per hour, thinking it would be funny. Me and my friend both get flung off the back of the car. Luckily, he landed in grass but still ended up breaking his arm. Me on the other hand, I was thrown onto the pavement where I cracked my head open, broke a collarbone, ankle, and 3 ribs. I went unconscious, and from what I was told, one of my friends literally sat there holding the back of my head together while they waited on medics to arrive. I had to get life-flighted to a hospital about an hour away. I had 2 or 3 seizures on the way. When I came around in the hospital later that evening, the doctor told me had my friend not been holding my head together, or had the medics shown up like 5 minutes after they did, I probably wouldn't have made it. But all is well now. Actually, the dumbass girl left after she saw how bad what she had done was, and actually ended up getting arrested and charged with something or another. The last I heard she was in jail, but that was like 2-3 years ago. That must have been horrifying for everyone involved. Kudos to the friend holding your head together. Row. Alone and had food poisoning that caused a gastrointestinal infection. Roommate found me dehydrated and delirious. I took in 6 fluid bags at the hospital. Scary stuff. My wife had that happen to her in college. She was so dehydrated she was hallucinating. She was so frustrated because she could see people walk by the bathroom while she was puking crapping, and she asked for water. She was screaming, "Why won't you help me?" Not sure how near I actually was. I have a cardiac arrhythmia, I forget which specific one, but it causes blood to get stuck, slosh backwards. I was young when it was diagnosed, 20 plus years later, and all I know is it feels god awful. My husband was working late, so I was home by myself and the sun had set. It had finally cooled down enough to walk my dogs, so I put their leashes on and walked outside. I felt a wave of dread as I left my porch, but looking around and seeing nothing, I continued. I made it about half a mile from my house when I started feeling strange. I was disoriented, had lived on this street my whole life and was suddenly lost. My dogs, 2 husky shepherd mutts and a pit bull cattle howler mix, normally bounced all over the place at the end of their leashes but had walked at an AKC approved heel the whole time. They were panting and stressed. I stood there, trying to force myself to do anything. Finally my mind shouted home and I started walking. Stumbling back, I stopped several times to gasp for air, like I was being held underwater. At the time I was 120 pounds and ran 5 miles a day. It was 80 degrees and I felt like my face and mouth were numb. I got inside, gave the dogs ice cubes, and sat on the floor. I was just blank. I couldn't think. All I could do was focus on staying upright and gasping every few minutes. The room was spinning. My hands in front of my legs were numb and I was starting to spasm, muscles twitching. On a whim I looked at the heart rate monitor I had on, a Polar FT7, and it was registering 39 BPM. I remember thinking that was too low, so I got up and jumped around a bit. It rocketed to 120, and I watched it fall to 43. I felt like a cold blanket got thrown on me, so I laid on the floor. I just felt foggy and tired. I was disoriented and my whole body was either aching or numb and I couldn't breathe. So I went to bed. I dreamed of my life up to then, and then nothing. Just darkness. I woke up just fine the next morning and wrote it off as being overtired. Stupid. But I was 19. It's happened twice since then. Aside from the arrhythmia itself, I haven't found a doctor that can tell me what happened. Apparently it isn't super deadly, but it certainly feels like it. I was skiing with my best friend on his birthday. For the skiers out there, it was a blue bad groomer day. The snow was hard and fast. I have always been a bit of a speed freak, so I was flying down the mountain. I must have been pushing 50-60 miles per hour. I was getting down a double black diamond at the bottom of the mountain, racer's edge for my Hunter MTN skiers, when I realized I was out of control and I was going to crash. The trail was split down the middle by a grove of trees that normally you could pass by on the left or the right, eventually turning right to get down to the lift. This particular day, the right side was closed. On the left there is a fence to keep you from going into a ravine type of area off trail. I cut as hard as I could to turn across the trail towards the lift. As I approached the fence, all of a sudden, I am on my back against the fence. My skis were wedged into the fence so hard I had to release my bindings and pry them out. I was concussed, my goggles cracked, mouth bleeding. I was wearing a new thermal and the spot on my back where I hit the ground ripped open from the impact and actually had a cut. I was in a sling stumbling around for a few days with a headache. The thing is, I don't remember hitting the fence or falling or anything. 1 second I was turning, the next I was in the ground. For the life of me I have no idea how I survived. I should have gone headfirst into a fence that does not move. Forgot what age I was. Young dumb kid age, maybe 7 or 8. Friends and I were swimming in our pool and I decided it was a good idea to go to the deep end and swim from the bottom upwards behind the ladder. In the space between the ladder and the side of the pool, I knowingly did this and got stuck once I got the top half of my body past the first steps. So there I am, basically stuck and drowning 4 feet underwater. My other friend who had goggles on saw me and somehow pulled the bottom half of the ladder far enough away from the wall for me to swim out from under it. The angle I was at, I had no leverage on it myself since my arms were stuck to my side. So yeah, that was terrifying. Now anytime someone jokingly jumps on me or if I have the slightest feeling of being held down underwater, I completely go into sheer panic. If my friend didn't see me, or they just left me underneath, I would have 100% drowned. Crap man, I got anxiety just from reading that. Good thing your friend took it seriously instead of assuming you were joking. About 2 years ago I had a cold. I didn't think much about it except something along the lines of frick it sucks but it will go away. 10 days later it was still there and had gotten worse, but it still wasn't going to keep me down. I went out with a couple of friends, met a guy and ended up sleeping with him. It was okay, nothing spectacular, but I was kind of out of breath. I just ignored it. It was nothing and went away. The next day I met up the same guy for lunch and ended up at his place again. Same thing happened. I was completely out of breath again, but this was much worse. Guy noticed and thought it was his spectacular performance. I knew it wasn't that good. After I left I thought maybe I should stop at one of those walk-in clinics at Walgreens or CVS. I tried to make an appointment but there were no openings. I was about to just go home when I drove by an urgent care place and decided to stop. By this point I was still out of breath but naive as to what could be going on. I checked in and they took me right away despite having a pretty busy waiting room. Took my vitals and my BP was 80/50 and my O2 was in the low 80s. The nurse was amazed I was still standing. She ran and got a doctor who came running in immediately. She verified my vitals and said I had to get to the emergency room immediately and ambulance was on the way to take me there. I said I could drive and I was told I would probably pass out shortly, so they wouldn't allow me to drive. I started to get a little concerned after that. Things get a little hazy after that, but I remember arriving at the ER and being greeted by several doctors. I remember getting X-rays, MRIs and CTs. My mom and friend had also showed up. Someone had called them since they were my emergency contact. The last thing I remember is the doctor explaining to them that I had severe pneumonia. Both my lungs had collapsed and I was septic. I was in and out of it for several days. I was in the ICU and in isolation for a couple. It took a while to recover and I still have some lasting damage, but for the most part made a full recovery. On the positive side, since I was in the hospital for so long, I was able to quit smoking and I have never gone back. I was told after I got out of the hospital that had I gone home that first night instead of getting medical help I probably would have not made it. As for the guy who thought his performance caused me to become short of breath, when he next reached out to me for a hookup I was still in the hospital. I explained what was going on and he freaked out about being exposed to some horrible disease and he couldn't afford to get sick at the moment. It went on and on like that. I never spoke to him again. Have a lung problem, was born with it, had both my lungs collapse during an asthma attack, was clinically dead for about 3 minutes, felt like I got hammered and blacked out, only the hangover lasted about 2 weeks. So when I was 10, I had just gotten back from a Cub Scout camping trip in the middle of buttfuck nowhere Ohio, no phone service, over an hour away from the nearest place with phone service. It was the day after and I was out with my dad picking up firewood when my stomach just started hurting like heck, as if I was taking the biggest crap of my 12-year-old life. I had to lay down in the back of the truck. My mom felt bad for me. My dad thought I was faking. He was in a pissy mood for the rest of the day. Anyways, I got home about 3 hours later still feeling terrible, worse even. I then proceed to sit on the toilet for another hour, in agonizing pain trying to push out what I thought was the biggest turd ever created in the history of mankind to no avail. My mom comes in and asks if she can put 2 fingers up against my lower waist and push for a second. She does so, and I feel the worst pain I've ever felt in my entire life. Her brother had appendicitis when he was 16 and that was the thing that sent him over the edge like it just did to me. I get rushed to Children's Hospital and I lay in my mom's lap for 3 hours in horrible pain waiting to get in to see a doctor. When I finally do get in, they do an ultrasound on my lower chest and waist, and I hear the nurse gasp. My mom says "oh number" and the nurse tells her that the appendix is supposed to as big around as your pinky finger. Mine was about 1.5 inches in diameter and I was rushed into surgery. I was in so much pain that normally 12-year-old me was absolutely terrified of needles. I kicked a nurse in the chest multiple times last time I had to have a shot that I just let them stick the IV in without fighting. I was so exhausted from waiting in the pain that I passed out before they put the mask on. Before my mom called my dad still thought I was faking, until he got the call from my mom where he thought she was prankish him until she yelled at him to get down to the hospital. I wake up the next morning and look over to my dad, and the first words I say to him were "I told you so." It's hilarious looking back on it but also terrifying because normally symptoms last 24 hours. Mine lasted 10. I later learned I was 2 hours away from the appendix bursting. It was even scarier thinking that I was just at a Cub Scout camp miles and miles away from help, and I would have died there more than likely. You have been visited by the sleeping Italian. Comment "sleep tight Lil Guido" for nice spaghetti and meatball dreams all night. If you comment "keep fighting, Papa." If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.